All right, cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Gaming Academy. I'm Ashraf. I'm one of the organizers of the Academy, and I'm the speaker today, or the educator. So today we are going to be talking about narrative. And let me just share my slides over here. Share. I'm gonna hide all of you at the top. Okay. Can you guys see the screen? Okay, I can see things popping up, so I will assume that that's a yes. Perfect. طيب. So I'm Ashraf. I'm a game developer slash educator slash game maker enthusiast. And this is Lucky. Lucky is a hyena. He was born unknown. But let me just, actually tell you who I am بالضبط. So I'm a game developer at a company called Falafel Games in Lebanon. We usually make games specifically targeted towards the Arab audience because they're in Arabic to a certain extent and because the market is relatively empty. I am the founder and organizer of the Gaming Academy. So thank you all for signing up. This is, it's wonderful. I'm really happy to have you here. I'm an instructor at the American University of Beirut. I teach narrative design. So what you guys are getting is a glimpse of what I usually give in class. Um, I'm an organizer at the Arabic Games. So for those of you who have seen the conference last year, I know some of you here have seen it. So you know what that is. For those of you that don't, it's basically a yearly event that teaches people about everything games. It's they have like sessions on by specific speakers on their experiences or on their actual experience as well. So things like how to be a designer, how to be a developer, how to get into the industry. We had talks by Dalia actually as well. So one of the previous speakers, educators, sorry, at the Academy, gave a session at Arabic Games. And I am the head of volunteers at the Animal Encounter. It's an NGO for wildlife conservation. So we take care of animals like Lucky. Don't do this at home. I'm quite literally doing this at home though. Don't be like me. But yeah, it's in Ras Jabal. We have things like bears, hyenas, wolves, jackals, wild birds, sheep, goats, stuff like that. So you guys should come visit if you're ever in Lebanon or in Alay or something. But yeah, this is me basically. So who exactly are you guys? So who is attending the session? Who is the session for? It's for narrative designers or anybody interested in creating stories for their worlds. It's for anybody who considers themselves a world builder, anybody who likes to create and expand on ideas and give them life and breathe, a bit of excitement into whatever ideas they have. This, could also be spread to creative individuals. So anybody who considers themselves an artist of any form, including, actual like art, including music, including stories, anything that you could consider creative, this talk is for you. So very quickly, this is how the session is going to be broken down. We're going to talk a bit about world building, different narrative types, your player agency, what that means, and how you use it. Then we're going to have a small break. Then we're going to discuss missions, levels, and quests, not in the order I said them. And then we're going to talk about how you should be inspired to create the world that you want. And then we're going to get into a Q&A and a quick homework at the end of it all. If I start lagging, please spam the chat so I know to either repeat or just be sad until my internet gets better. All right. So usually I would have a JoJo's meme over here with, Zawardo, but again, just like Jenna said, I'd rather not have the thing taken down for copyright or something of the sort. Also, I do have images, but I have sourced them. So, anything that you see here in terms of images are not mine. They go to their respective creators. So when you guys want to build the world, there are two ways to create the thing you want to do. Let's say you wanted to create something like Skyrim. Okay, Skyrim is a huge, expansive open world game where you can be whoever you want to be and you can do whatever you want to do. But there is a very big general quest line that you could follow called the main quest line. And once you finish it, you become you are the Dragonborn, but you basically do what the Dragonborn needs to do. Or You could have a game that's kind of like Mario, where everything is built for the purpose of what Mario has at hand and whatever he can do. So a macro level world is a world that you build that has the player play inside what it is. So an example of that, just like I said, is Skyrim. Skyrim, you have the chance to be whoever you want to be. You can either be a warrior, you can be an archer, you can be a mage, you can be a vampire, you can be a werewolf. It's up to you, to be honest. And whatever you do fits into the world. But when you want to plan for something as expansive as this, you usually go for something called a macro type of building, so world building, sorry. So what you build is the world itself, and then you add players into it. A micro level is starting actually from, it's not really the level that's micro, it's starting at a level that is, so the world that you build starts at a base, and the base is either macro or micro. So the micro world would be something along the lines of Hollow Knight, for example, along the lines of Celeste, anything where the main character has levels built for them is a micro build. So I do usually prefer to have a bit of interaction in my classes. So if you guys have examples of macro and micro worlds that you would like to talk about, either raise your hand or just unmute and talk, or just type them in the chat. So how many of you have actually played Hollow Knight or Celeste or Ori or let's see, what else? Binding of Isaac, let's say. Kareem said yes. I assume that this means he's played them all. So well done. Very happy for you. Binding of Isaac, yes. Celeste. Okay, perfect. So you guys have played these games. So for example, when you have these levels, Fez as well, yes, correct. When the world is created, enter the gungeon, yeah. This counts as well to a certain extent. So in the levels, in the games that I've mentioned, let's take just a very general example as well. Hades is more or less, it's a special case, I would say. It does lean towards the micro rather than the macro, because the world does revolve to a certain extent around Zagreus instead of the world that he traverses. However, supergiants are a very special case of game development. They know how to build everything in parallel, just like Jenna said before. So if you haven't seen Jenna's talk, you better go do that now. So yeah, so the games that I mentioned for the micro worlds have levels or things that you need to do that revolve around whatever the player is doing or whatever the player is. And I don't mean that you put the player at the center of attention, because technically speaking, things like, again, Skyrim, things like most open world games are macro, are focused on the macro level, even if you as a player are put as, the center of attention. We will talk about players in another session though, or characters actually. So, I'll just stick to that. So yeah, you guys get macro and micro. The reason I mentioned this at the beginning was because I want you guys to start thinking of the world you're going to build from now, if you would like to make your game. What you missed. Macro level is basically any game that has the world built first, and then the player is kind of like plopped into it. Whereas a micro world is a world where the character is fixed or created in a way that they move around perfectly, and then you get to a point where you build the world around whatever the player can do. Has anybody played Super Meat Boy? This is probably a very good example of a micro build. It's basically, everything that you can do as Super Meat Boy is set that way because of, what you can do basically. So yeah. So yeah, these are some questions that you can ask yourself when you want to think of macro versus micro worlds. What actions does a player take? How big is the world? What can they explore? What can they not explore? Is it more of like, they're free to do whatever they want, or is it just very specific actions and tasks? What story do you want to tell? Is it something that you want the players to talk about, or is it something that you want to tell the players? How free is the player to build their character? This goes back into RPG. Eileen, why does the character do what they want to do? So is there a sort of vengeance, or are they more like the silent protagonist where you just, you control them and you just give them your own personality, you know? These are all questions that you can ask. And depending on these questions and the definition of macro and micro that we mentioned before, you can set your own world. So no matter which one you choose, when you want to build a world, it needs to be believable. Okay, let's say I said in a post-apocalyptic world, there are unicorns. Okay, this sentence is something that you would suspend your disbelief and agree with me on, because this is the thing that I told you will happen. Now, let's say I told you that there is a Dark Souls game which contains guns. You might feel a bit weird about this, even though, Dark Souls games are, they exist, and guns exist as well. But, you don't really have like, an airplane or something of the sort. Yes, crossbows make sense in these games because of what they are built into. However, guns don't make too much sense because the world that they've built revolves around a specific, form that they've created for themselves. So when you want to create something, you have to do your own research, and your research needs to, help you build whatever game you want to build. So again, the example I gave at the beginning, post-apocalyptic world that has unicorns. It makes sense because this is what you have to base yourself upon. Whereas when I give you a preset world, this is when you're like, oh, okay, so this makes sense. Like, have you ever watched these movies when you have this one character that's just sitting there, and then suddenly some action happens, and then he finds a gun, and then he shoots 100 people, and then you're like, yeah, this is wonderful, this is amazing. And then, that's the end of the movie. And then there's another movie where, the main character only shoots one bullet, and you're like, wow, that was tough. I cannot believe this just happened. What do you mean he shot a gun? That's insane. And this is because the kind of idea and impact that each game wants to give changes depending on the kind of world you wish to build. And it changes depending on the medium that you are trying to talk about. So whenever you want to do research about a game and about the world that you wish to build, you must make sure that whatever you're building makes sense, all right? Once I had somebody talk to me about a game they wanted to make, and they were like, yeah, so my game happens 100 million years ago when humans were around, and it's in Africa. So I stopped him and I was like, okay, so you're saying 100 million years ago. Were there humans 100 million years ago? And you said Africa. Africa is an entire continent. Are you sure you wish to write about an entire continent and its people? I mean, you can probably, make do with your own imagination and stuff. But at the same time, there are different ways for you to make your game be like, or your players be like, oh, okay, this makes sense, I guess, because, this is there. I mean, Africa wasn't even there, I think, 100 million years ago, was it? Was it Pangaea? When did Pangaea come to be? Does anybody know? I'm not sure, to be honest. But yeah, basically the point is, when you want to decide on a time in the past, make sure that it makes sense. The kind of world that you're building, especially if it's set in the real world. Another example, there was a game that discussed a specific war that happened somewhere nearby in the region, and they wanted to set the invaders as the heroes. So, they made the game, and then they decided to make the people that were hurt or the people that were invaded as just, people that you shoot very normally. And they made the city that was invaded as something that is randomly generated. So by doing this, they've basically insulted an entire, group of people just by being extremely insensitive to the fact that they were invaded, they were killed, they were hurt, and they were made into a game. So yes, exactly. I'm not going to mention what it is because I don't want to give it publicity, but this is something that, you know, they kind of flipped research on its head in the worst way possible. Yes, yes. Rami did talk about it quite a bit, and he was quite heated about it at the time. Also, if you haven't watched Rami Ismail's talk, go do so as well. So yeah, the best ideas that you create are ideas that are born from a solid understanding. So this is why whenever I want to tell people to make games, I ask them to include as much of themselves as they can, because whoever you are will affect the kind of things you want to make. So make things you love and make things that you know you want to do. Another example from another medium, One Piece. Has anybody seen One Piece or heard of it? It's the anime with the pirates and stretchy men and stuff. Yes. So basically, each of the characters does have a relatively unique personality. And this is because the writer based off each of these characters off of one of his friends. So by doing so, he was able to bring each of the characters' personalities to life because he saw what they were like and what they did, which is pretty cool. So whenever you want to do some research about a world that you wish to build, ask, you know, the four W's and one H, which is really annoying. Ask yourself, who is there? Who was, you know, who were the main people that existed at the time? What did they do? What was there? What kind of things happened at the time? Where is the thing that you want to do it? Is it something that you just imagined, or is it a place where, you know, that actually exists? What time zone did you decide on? So if you, you know, set Lebanon in the 70s, it's different than Lebanon in the 80s. It's different than Lebanon in the 2020s. You know, Lebanon is also different than Egypt. It's different than Morocco. It's different than Saudi. And just because somebody speaks Arabic doesn't mean that they are from the same area in the world, you know? I think we all would know, basically. So yeah, when, you know, you have your actual action and the thing that happens, how did it happen? How did the things that exist come to be? There, for example, there is one game, I forgot its name, which is kind of sad, but they had the characters, whenever you kill someone, you can leave their bodies on the floor, but people aren't scared of them. They actually just, you know, they go around and look at the body in a curious fashion. And this was actually set on purpose because the game was made in a way, at a time, sorry, when murders were common. And they were something that just happened so often to the extent that people just were like, okay, this is normal, I guess, this is what's happening. So they actually kind of showed this time period through this kind of action, basically. If you would like the link to some of the games, I will send it to you, but just remind me later. So yeah, what kind of things can you use as inspiration? Because I said you can do research, but you know, research is only one part of it, because if we're all researching the same thing, we might have the same outputs. However, when you wish to get inspired, this comes from within to a certain extent, no matter how corny this sounds. The things that you wish to create are things that are, just like I said here, a marriage of your experiences and your research. So as you guys saw, I run the animal encounter with my family. We take care of wild animals, so I know quite a bit about them. So I know for a fact that if and when I decide to make a game about animals, I'm going to have specific facts that other people might not know. So fun fact, for example, if I wanted to choose an animal to represent Lebanon, I might choose the hyena. And this is specifically because the hyena is the national animal of Lebanon. So just by saying something like this, I'm able to use my own inspiration and my own creation to help, you know, set up your own, to help set your game up, you know. The ideas that you create are things that you need to give weight to. So again, just like I said, when you want to create a game and you want to create a world, make sure that you give it the weight it deserves. All right. Um, and at the end of the day, whenever you want to create an idea, just be honest with yourself. Is this the actual thing you want to do? is this the right thing to do? Or is it just something that you want to do because it sounds quote unquote cool? Remember, every time you watch a really good show, it's not because all of the characters are always just awesome and over the top creative. Not everything is JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, basically. You have characters that are weak, you have characters that are strong, you have characters that have conflicting personalities or something that they need to overcome. So the thing that makes an idea and a world good is the fact that you built something that has its own merits and its own flaws. So create something, but make sure that it in itself has the semblance of a realistic world, basically. All right. Any questions? What inspires you guys, actually? Throw it in the chat. I would love to know what things you look into, what kind of things you like, what kind of things you enjoy, you know, games and anime. Yes, that's 80% of the population, I would say. Kai is a good answer. Kai is Lean's dog, by the way. All right, so when you want to create a world, there are a few things you have to keep in mind. There are different kinds that you can create, and they are more or less divided into two types. The first one is a realistic world, and the second one is a fantastical world. So a realistic world is a world where things are real. So Call of Duty, for example, has a realistic world. Assassin's Creed, same. PUBG, this also is considered a realistic world. Unpacking. Unpacking is a very cute game. I highly recommend it. It's also a realistic world. Anything where the world itself, is placed in somewhere that exists, you can consider it a realistic world. And this is specifically where all the research that I mentioned before is extremely important, because the last thing you want to do is mess up and say that people in Brazil speak French, for example, instead of Portuguese, even though some people think that it might be Spanish. And these are the kind of mistakes that you shouldn't do. Or like, let's say, have you ever seen a movie or a game that includes Arabic text and the text is left to right instead of right to left? And the characters aren't interconnected and the words are wrong and everything they put is wrong. And please just like we make fun of people for not getting the language correct, we have to do the same and make sure that even if it is a low budget movie, you can just open Google Translate and check it out. Bassam, yes, you had a whole blog, and Rami Ismail has a website called isthisarabic.com, if I'm not wrong. So this explains in very basic detail, or very basic ideas about what Arabic is. So I'm glad to see that many people are doing this. All right, so this is basically for realistic worlds. Realistic worlds are worlds that are real, there are worlds that exist, and there are worlds that you need to make sure to explain in a good way, because the last thing you want to do is to offend people to the extent that they make fun of you the way we're making fun of anybody who cannot spell Arabic. I'm looking at you, Marvel. You've you've goofed up. Anyway, then you have worlds or worlds that are in fantasy. I'm lagging. Okay, testing. Okay. So fantastical worlds are worlds that are in fantasy. There are worlds that you can create in your head and nothing else matters. You can do whatever you want because this is the kind of thing that you've set. So Skyrim, for example, is one of them. The Witcher is another. If you'd like, just send a few names in the chat as well of worlds that you like. So Sekiro could count, but I'm asking for actual maps of worlds. No, the map, or like the world itself. Okay, so Elden, okay, so you guys are mentioning a lot of games. Remnant of the Ashes, Genshin Impact, MGS. What's MGS? Bloodborne. Okay, so you guys are all mentioning fantastical worlds. Oh, Metal Gear Solid. Actually haven't seen too much into it, to be honest. If it's set in an actual, country in the past, then it needs to be, it is considered a realistic world. Fallout New Vegas is somewhere in the middle between fantastical and realistic, because Fallout is basically after a Fallout. However, it is set on Earth to a certain extent. When you want to set something in the future, it does go nearer to fantastical worlds, specifically because it's your own fantasy and you're creating things rather than going back in the past. And how many of you have actually seen how many of you have actually read up some of the facts in Assassin's Creed, especially the early games? You can look into these and you can enjoy some of the actual real world things that have existed because of that. Can it be a futuristic world that is based on the past world? Yes, definitely, definitely. This would actually, so I want you to answer this question. Which of the subtypes would the futuristic world that is based off of the past world be? So yeah. Okay, so then you can also, just because I say that it's fantasy doesn't mean that, this helps a lot. You have things like, if you like to read books, you have things like Percy Jackson, which could be fantasy. And then you have things like, I don't know, let's say Star Trek, or what was it called again? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Each of these books is in a different world to a certain extent. Dune as well. Yeah, each of these basically, they are in a different genre of fantasy. Even 1984, Brave New World, if you've read these books, they are fantastical, but they exist in different genres. So again, subtypes now. Depending on the kind of world you want to create, you're able to set, these aren't, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. However, these are some of the subtypes. So you've got war-torn worlds, which exist in worlds that have been torn apart and destroyed completely. You've got besieged worlds where you're somewhere and then there's somebody attacking you and you're like the underdog and you want to punch everybody else so that you can survive. You've got dystopian worlds such as cyberpunk, and it's basically just a world that's been like it's our world to a certain extent. You've got utopian worlds, which is like Pokemon to a certain extent. You've got Stardew Valley as well. It could go under that. Same thing with Animal Crossing. You've got awakening worlds, which are worlds that are starting to survive and exist and grow into something that is, that has an existence, such as Spore. If you haven't played Spore, it's basically a game where you start as a unicellular organism and then you evolve to become a multicellular one, and then you go out on land and you can choose if you want to be an omnivore or a carnivore or a herbivore, and then depending on the kind of thing that you evolve, you start to grow. You've got changing worlds. I couldn't really find many games, but I thought of Wall-E, where Wall-E is, it's basically the Earth, and humans get to come back because life is viable again. You've got dying worlds where the world that you're living on is going to, it's just too old, or there's something wrong with it, or it's just going to disappear basically. Newly discovered worlds, which is anything and everything is possible, and you can just create whatever you would like to do. But it's more to the exploration side. And finally, you've got destroyed worlds, which includes Fallout, which is worlds that have been nuked or destroyed or just absolutely obliterated for one reason or another. And yeah, so comments, okay. How about civilization games like The Endless Space or Stellaries? So these would technically go into the newly discovered worlds to a certain extent, but they also lean towards, at least civilization, it could to a certain extent lean towards the realistic, specifically because of the fact checking that they need to do to make sure that the history that they have of each of the different empires makes sense. Doesn't destroyed world fall under war-torn world? So no, because destroyed world is a world after the war has ended. And destroyed worlds don't need to be destroyed by war. They could be destroyed by a solar flare, for example. So yeah. Sports games. They don't really go under the worlds because what you're building is not a world. You're more of like building a just the game itself to a certain extent. Yes, Nuclear Hondi and Civ, exactly. So we will talk about things like sports games in a bit, and I think there are a few people that are going to be interested in it. All right, so just like I said at the beginning, you are a narrative designer. You are a creative person. You are somebody who is going to be giving the world life. Okay. So there are a few things that you could do as a narrative designer. Some of the things have to do with environmental narrative. Who knows what that is, by the way? Just try to guess what an environmental narrative is. You've got dialogue, which is basically, you have to write different ideas that people say and what they say to each other and what they say to the player. You've got journal entries for anybody who's interested in knowing more about the world. So I read somewhere here in the chat that somebody enjoyed reading some of the facts in the Assassin's Creed stuff. So this would be considered a journal entry. You've got fluff text, which is more like, oof, ouch, hey, over there, look here, oh no, there's a cave here. Ah, this is tiring, ouch, oof. These are all like to a certain extent fluff text. Then you've got backstories, which include anything and everything about all the players. These do usually go into the wiki pages to a certain extent, but yes. All right, so I'm reading some of the comments. Yes, Ed, technically this is correct. Environmental narrative is telling the player the story by placing items in specific places. Being able to tell the lore and story from environmental design, that's also correct. Well done, Ahmad. So basically, the point of environmental narrative is to the show don't tell that some people use. This is it. So when you are building your own environment, you have to make sure that it makes sense. So you can't put things like ice next to lava and make sure that the ice doesn't melt, because that doesn't make sense. Unless you're, in the ice age and there's going to be like a very big explosion or something of the sort from a volcano, and I'm not sure. Whenever you want to create your story of the world, you have to make sure that the things that are placed there make sense. All right. So, for example, I could switch out in the picture that we have over here. You could switch out the knight for a car, and the car is going to hit the tree, and that would make sense. But if you decided to bring this knight and put him in a hyper-futuristic world, you're either going to be confused or curious. And this will depend on how you decide to tell the story via the environment. So just to summarize this part specifically, exactly, time traveling knights. The environmental narrative is any story that you tell via the world that you've placed. So just as an example, I'm going to go back one slide. Can I do that? Okay. So let's take a map. Let's take this map, actually, the one that we have in front of us at the moment. We've got the knight, we've got the tree, and we've got the small house in the back. Oops. So if I wanted to turn this specific map into, let's say, a dystopian world, all I would have to do is, I would break the house a bit. I would make the grass be a bit more yellow. I would probably have the tree kind of also broken to a certain extent. I would have the knight be rusted in armor. These are, just some things that I would do. I keep clicking on the wrong thing, but that's okay. If I wanted to make it a utopian world, I would probably add a few more flowers, for example, here and there. So yeah, these are just a few examples of the kind of things that you can do with an environmental narrative and the kind of things that you should do with an environmental narrative. All right. So narratives, we've got multiple types of them, and what you want to do depends on the kind of game that you want to make. Linear narratives are basically narratives that go from point A to B to C to D, and then you're good to go. It's basically like watching a movie, but you're in charge instead of the director, and I would be very proud of you for doing that. Then you've got branching narratives. So branching narratives are basically stories that have different endings, and depending on your choices, they're basically all the your choices matter, where you end up in the same place at the end of it all. And if you've watched Jenna's talk, if you haven't, please do, you will see that, once you branch, you have to make sure to come back to a specific point and then go back down. And then finally, you've got the open narratives where two things happen. The first one is you make your own story. The second one is you decide what you want to do in the game. So the difference between the two, when you want to make your own story, this doesn't need to exclusively be for the games that you play with a story. So you're playing Fortnite, you're playing League of Legends, you're playing Dota, you're playing any MOBA game that comes to mind, or you're even playing sports. The stories that come out from the matches and the things that happen are part of an open narrative. The other open narrative is obviously you choosing your own, quests and your own in an open world RPG, for example. So yeah, and then obviously on the side you can also see the string of pearls. The string of pearls is basically you have to follow the main story, but there are also side levels that you can get to that are considered bonuses to a certain extent. Wally, the reason you play League of Legends is the same reason I like to solve my Rubik's Cube a lot. Every single time you go into the game, there's a new challenge and it's different. The things that change are your own perspectives of the game, the way you play it, and the way you interact with the characters. Yes, if we have time after the break, I'll bring it and solve it for you. Okay, cool. Narratives. So linear narratives, they're basically following a specific story. If you check the thing at the bottom, this is this is Destiny, if I'm not mistaken. This is how the game works. It basically starts with a rising action. It hypes you up a lot. It puts you with like a lot of strength, a lot of power. If anybody's played the old God of War games, you start out by defeating this giant monster and stuff, and then you're suddenly stripped of all your power, and then you have to slowly gain it back, basically. So this the feeling of intense power and strength and stuff. This is all very important to get you hooked into the game. Again, if we look into Skyrim, the first thing you do after escaping prison is you kill a freaking dragon. Like, that's amazing. You just feel like, I can do this. I mean, yes, sure, you were helped by guards, but you were the one that did all the work. They're just there to be stupid, and you're the one that's important. So this is more or less the start of it. And then the action falls a bit, so you can just catch your breath and kind of start to learn how to move forward and stuff. And then slowly, the action rises and falls, kind of like a movie, until you get to a point where, you seem powerful enough. Then, just for extra emotional drama, you might lose your powers right before you get to the battle, to the final battle. And through the power of friendship, you finally, get the extra mile, and then you're able to punch the bad guy all the way to space, and then you win, and congratulations. For those of you who have played Portal, for example, Portal 2 specifically, whenever you remember the last shot, the last thing that you need to do when the thing opens at the end, I won't spoil for those of you who haven't played it, even though you should have played it by now. The game's like almost 20 years old. You basically just feel absolutely like really smart for just doing what you did. And this is, the top of the linear narrative. This is the forgot the word, but that's okay. This is basically, when you just feel like you are in charge and you are the best person that exists in the world that you're living in at the moment. So the climax, this is the word I was looking for. So this is when the story shows you that you are in charge and you are the most amazing person in the room on earth ever. And this is what you as a linear narrative writer want to do. So a linear narrative is a story that moves forward in a straight line, but pretends to give the player their own agency. And the thing is, players will accept that to a certain extent. So again, when you're playing things like Portal, you're playing a puzzle game. However, you want to move forward in the levels because you don't want GLaDOS to win, and you want to be the one that survives and finishes the game to a certain extent. So when a player is playing a game, it's different than somebody watching a movie. I gave this example before, but basically when you are watching Batman, you're sad that his parents died, but you're sad for him. Whereas when you're playing a game and you get the "you died" screen. You're the one that feels insulted because you were the one that lost, not your character. So this is where player agency comes in. And through this idea of player agency, you allow the player to feel that they are in control and they are in charge of the story and moving it forward. So the way to give the player a chance to be themselves in the game is by giving them a very simple, you must do this to win. And if you don't, then you lose. So, stop the train, CJ, before, it gets, you get what I mean. So basically the point is complete the tasks by giving the player a specific goal they need to reach before something else happens. So, the before could be before they die. Also, read books. Books are really good inspiration. They will give you so many twists and turns that you never expected. I do recommend Mistborn for those of you who haven't read it. For those of you who have, well done, very proud of you. It's quite the fantastical world, to say the least. All right. So anyway, branching narratives. Branching narratives are basically ones where you can have different decisions. However, remember, we always need to shorten our decisions so that we don't have to write a million endings at the end of it all. I've done this mistake. Don't do that mistake, please. I beg you. So I even added an example just to show you guys the kind of things that you can do when you branch with a narrative and then come back to its, to its essence. So an example is, you are a player that walks into a shop. You're very happy with yourself. And then the shopkeeper comes up to you and he tells you, so what are you looking for? And you're like, خيي ليك بدي إياها لهالشغلة من هون. And then he's like, this mirror, this shiny mirror, you want this? Well, this is gonna cost you. And then you're like, oh no, I'm not paying for that. And then you just turn around and you go to leave. And then as soon as you turn to leave, I don't know, like Abu Kis comes in and he's like, يلعن أبوك جاي قتلك أنت وأهلك وما بعرف شو. So, you grab the mirror and then you're like, no, you. And then he looks up at the mirror and then he gets scared of his face and then he dies. So, the shopkeeper could be like, thank you so much. You've saved me. I think I'll just give you this mirror as a gift. And then, you just keep going on with the story. Or you could decide to go up to the shopkeeper and be like, and he'd be like, oh, ألف ليرة. You'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, مع الانهيار الاقتصادي أهلا وسهلا مش مشكلة, it's just ألف ليرة. So you give him the money and then you take it. And then as soon as you do, the monster comes in, Abu Kis comes back in and says the same thing he said before. And then you also know him with the mirror. And then he dies. And then the shopkeeper's like, oh my gosh, you've saved me so much time and space. And now my window isn't broken. So I'm going to give you the money that you gave me back as a token of thank you, of gratitude. That was terrible. So basically, you ended the attack or the level very quickly. I'll get to you in a bit, Ronald. Without any problems, because you branched into two different directions. You gave the player their own agency, and then you moved the story forward in the same direction, giving the player both outcomes at the end of the day. Yes, Life is Strange is basically, it does that sometimes. Ronald, do you have a question?
Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask if we need to add some kind of reward for each branch. Like, let's say if you decide to buy it in the first place, you get a ring. And if you decide to not buy it, you get the mirror. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Do you think this is a good solution to add to the story, or it needs to be equal so the player doesn't feel robbed or I don't know, misled maybe?
So this really depends on the story that you want to tell. Yani, if you decide that your choices are actually heavy and they really matter, then you can just not give the player the mirror anyway. You can have him steal the mirror and break it. So now he has to go and find it somewhere else and do something else completely to get it. But this was more of like an example to give the idea of how to separate your story into different branches. But again, just like Jenna mentioned before, and just like I'm mentioning again, make sure that when your branches expand, they come back to one spot at the end of it all so they can keep going forward. and you don't want to end up writing 100 different endings, unless you want unless you want to do something like the string of pearls, where the thing that you're doing might help build up your strength up until you get to the end, but it's not always necessary. So it really, really, really depends on the kind of story that you wish to tell. So what you said is correct in specific situations, and what I said is correct in other situations. So Jad, for example, mentioned Life is Strange. So Life is Strange, to a certain extent, is a narrative-driven game, but you're also given your own choices, and you can do specific things. However, once you do something, like let's say, I don't know, you decided to kill a character, then their best friend is the one that follows you around until they get to a point where the best friend also dies. And in another situation, it flips basically. So it really depends on what you're building and what you wish to do, basically. Yes, Flan will remember that exactly. Did that answer your question? Kind of hope it did.
Yeah, of course, of course. I was just wondering if you don't give a good reward, the player would feel that it's not a good game, or it's he was misled or rage quit. I don't know
Okay,
if there's a risk for that. This is my question.
Hala, I'm gonna set it in a different way. Have you played BioShock, or have you heard of it?
Of course.
Okay, so do you remember in the first game when you meet the little sisters, what are your two options?
I don't remember. I don't remember the story, but yeah.
So you can either take their power and kill them, or you can set them free. And depending on each option, when you take their power, you get stronger. When you set them free, it's the more moral choice. So you also get a bit more help, but it's not as much as taking the power for yourself. So the reward for the player is a different ending at the end of it all, depending on which kind of action you
But
decide to take.
but morally, wouldn't that? I mean, it's a bit tricky. Isn't this encouraging someone to be morally wrong? I don't know. Would this be considered as a negative thing, or I don't know, maybe encouraging someone to kill someone to get their stuff so they can continue on the journey, and this would be easier than getting the money to buy the stuff and go and continue the journey. So would this make a difference on or impact on the player? That's my question, because my concern at this point is how the player would feel so he can keep going on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You kind of answered your own question. It's all about how the player would feel. Do they care about the people that are around them? Are they a benevolent character, or are they an evil one? What kind of playthrough are they going for? Do they want to go for a pacifist route, or do they want to go for a genocide route? It's really up to the player to decide. But you give them the choice to be whoever they want to be. And this is where, actions have consequences comes in. If you want to do something and it's good, you're going to have consequences that might be bad. And if you want to do something that's bad, it doesn't mean that what you're doing is going to also cause a bad thing to happen, So it's very situational. But the point is, when you want to create multiple paths, each of them is going to have a risk, a reward, and a setback. And it's up to you to balance them out, especially since I know that you yourself are a game designer to a certain extent. So, this is, as a narrative designer, you make it interesting for everyone to play the game. As a game designer, you make sure that whatever the narrative designer wants to create makes sense and is viable for different play routes, let's say. So, yeah. The first time I played BioShock, I saved all the little girls. The second time, I want to see how much easier it would be if I don't, you know? Yeah, it's basically very, very fine
thank you.
to have choices.
Thanks.
Mhm. And actually, it's a technically شوية صبأت على السؤال, which is fine. Player agency. Player agency is the ability of the player to do what they want to do. And what the player gets to do depends on the kind of game that you're building. So is it a narrative heavy game, or is it just a MOBA or like an MMORPG, or is it something like Fortnite, or is it like a roguelike or something of the sort? Is death a mechanic? And if so, how many times do you want the player to die so they can move forward? These are all questions that you need to ask yourself, and to kind of set the narrative of the story that you want to build. A player's agency is all about what they can do and what you let them do. Because when a game says that a player can do anything and everything, I have yet to see a game, there's a Sims, but basically very, very, very few games allow you to go and poop, for example, most RPG games don't really have that option. They do have a sleep option, and they do have a hunger factor if you turn these things on. But generally speaking, just because a game says that you can do everything doesn't mean that you need to make the game do everything. Just as an example, there was a game that took the idea of agency a bit to the extreme. You basically make a deal with death, to that he will keep you alive, on the condition that you control each of your limbs individually. So each button on the keyboard controls a specific part of your arms and your legs, and you need to go about your day without dying, again, basically. So this is an example of a bit too much agency, for example, because you're controlling everything about the player. So yeah, in this case, the player agency and the storyteller agency that you can see in the diagram below are very, very strong. The game health, you're either going to be very frustrated by the game, or you are going to enjoy it a lot. And this is really hard to get right, especially in this case, because again, death was very entertaining at the time. Yes, it was a challenge, actually. Yes, exactly. It's kind of like QWOP. For those of you who haven't seen it, check it out. Yeah. So basically, depending on the kind of game you want to build, you're going to add different levels of agency. If you're playing a narrative, just a linear game, then you expect to have less player agency, which means player choice or freedom, let's say, and more on the storyteller and game health. If you want to build, just a full-on open world like Rust to a certain extent, Rust is a game where you spawn on an island to a certain extent, and then you have to build everything from scratch, and you have to go gather items and build your base and make sure that nobody attacks your base while you're sleeping, etc., etc. So in this case, there isn't too much storytelling because you can't do that in this kind of game. However, the players will tell their story after they're done with the game because they did this, this, and that, and then this cool thing happened, and then they were killed, so they rage quit. So these are a different kind of story that we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, do we have any questions about player agency?
Yes, I have one.
Yalla.
Sorry, I'll keep interrupting because this is really important. Okay, so what makes it right? Is it the writer's experience, or you need to test and keep testing to find a balance?
Between عم نحكي player agency, storyteller agency, and game health, correct?
How do you get it right?
So the first thing you need to do is choose the genre of the game you want to make. So if you are making an open world game, you're going to have to let go of storyteller agency to a certain extent. If you are making a level-based puzzle game, you're going to have to get rid of the player agency. Obviously not completely, but heck, basically. So what kind of game do you want to build is the first question you have to ask yourself. After you know the game that you want to build, you give weight to the things that you consider the most important to you as the designer, as the creator of the game. If you want to tell a story, then focusing on storyteller agency and game health are the most important. If you want to make something cool where you shoot things with big guns, then you're going to focus on game player agency. It's very tough to get all three, especially since where, like generally speaking, almost everyone is limited on budget with the exception of, really big companies, basically. Um, so getting it right is about building a game that feels right to you, because at the point where what you're building feels like it makes sense and it's cohesive, and your players start to flock around the game, and what you're making encourages them to either make their own art, their own stories, their own mods and stuff, this is when you know that what you're doing makes sense. And if you just look up any of the successful games, um, there are tons of them, and each of them does their own thing really well. So you don't need to think of all of them as important. You need to think about which of these will best fit into your game. Do you mind if I give your game as an example?
Of course, please.
Okay. So in your game, each it's an randomly generated multiplayer world, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So randomly generated already pushes you towards you leaning mostly on player agency and game health, much more than
Don't forget
storytelling.
multiplayer.
Yeah,
Don't forget multiplayer. So,
صح. But even before that, the storyteller agency is extremely important when the worlds are something that is fixed. لأن you can't tell a story if you don't know which way it's going. If you just ask any Dungeons and Dragons player, or actually Dungeon Master, how many times they've had to change the story on the fly because the characters that the people they were playing with decided to do something very stupid or very smart. Uh, um, you know, uh, you'll understand what I'm talking about, basically. So generally speaking, yes, thank you, Munio. So yeah, generally speaking, in your game, you're going to be focusing on player agency and game health. لأن the random generation of the terrain and the random generation of the players to a certain extent, they're randomly going to be plopped in because it's multiplayer. That what you are going to build is a world that makes sense, that's cohesive, that doesn't have toxic in a very clean environment, that doesn't have a fallen plane in or like a plane wreck in an extremely industrialized city, that doesn't have I don't know, something as normal as sunglasses in a world where people need to like Superman, basically, so Superman needs sun مثلا. Why would you have things that stop him from seeing the sun? هيك اشياء. So when it comes to player agency, you need to make sure that the players can do as much as you want. When it comes to game health, you need to make sure that the game itself is satisfying to play. And when it comes to storyteller agency, you need to make sure that whatever you are trying to tell is something that can, let's say, inspire people to listen to your story to the fullest. So you have to choose which of these you want to do and which of these you want to focus on. And depending on that, you can move forward. I hope this kind of answers your question to a certain extent.
yeah, it does actually.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So moral agency. Moral agency is basically just you giving the player an idea of whether to do the good thing or the bad thing. The thing is, morality is a gray area. Sometimes the bad guy isn't really the bad guy. He's not always just the worst person around. Sometimes he's just somebody that has taken these choices for specific reasons. If you find a thief that has stolen your money and he is running away with it, and you decide to follow him instead of catch him, and then you find out that he went to buy food and medicine because his wife was dying and he needed to save her because he loved her, you would probably forgive him a bit easier than if you found out that the thief was basically one of the high monarchs of the city that you're in. just as an example. So just because somebody is not the person that you want them to be, just because something needs to be good, doesn't mean that everybody agrees with us, you know? And if you've ever played Pokemon, you've probably met Team Rocket, and Team Rocket might have been like, oh my gosh, you have to join us. And you might have been like, yeah, but your options were only like no or heck no, you know? It's very annoying. Like, why would you give me a choice if my only answers are no? Or like, again, another example. You're playing a game like Fallout, and then you walk up to a character, and the things you can say are hello, hi, and what do you have for sale? The first two options are basically redundant because one of the things that, for example, in the filmmaking scene is start the scene as late as possible, um, as early as possible. Yes. So what this means is basically skip all the pleasantries and go to the point where the excitement exists. So once you do that, you're able to start the ball rolling as quickly as possible. So again, moral agency. Let's get back to this point specifically. What you consider good and bad doesn't mean that the other people are going to consider it to be good and bad. You could punish the player for choosing something that you wouldn't choose, but they will probably dislike the game if you decide to give them too much of a disadvantage. Again, I say too much of a disadvantage, not a disadvantage, because again, let's take things like papers, please. You have to check whether people deserve to cross the border or not. Sometimes, for example, people can fake some papers specifically to get in. Others will try to, like they could potentially try to bribe you. There are basically different things that they could do, and some of them like really need to do this because this is their only hope, while others just want to do this because they're not very good people. But the people that you might consider, but that I might consider not to be very good people, might strike a chord with you, and in this case, you would consider that they should pass by. So what I'm trying to say with all of this is moral agency is something that you include only if you can actually give the player the agency to choose whether they want to be with quote unquote good or quote unquote evil, and whether good and evil even makes sense at this point, because you might agree with the Stormcloaks and I might agree. I forgot their name. With the other group, everyone is going to be mad at me, but that's okay. I forgot their name completely. So yeah, basically that, Yani. فهيك, give players the choice only if you're willing to go through with whatever choice they choose in your story. All right, this is basically it. For some reason, I always like to cheer for the bad guys. It's because the bad guys are usually underrepresented in one way or another, or because what they're doing isn't bad enough for you to dislike them, which isn't really too big of a problem because sometimes it's just funny. Then you have quest agency. Quest agency is about giving the player the choice to either do a quest or not do a quest. Sometimes when you want the player to not do something, and you don't want to put a locked door behind it or put something like a stupid tree which you can just pass by and go and continue on your game, you can just completely obliterate the player if they try to go somewhere they shouldn't go. So Elden Ring does this. I actually wanted to get one of the swords that was in a high level place. So I saw like these stickmen to a certain extent. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can get to them. So fit it, and then I got, almost one hit basically. And that was probably the worst decision of my life. So I just grabbed the sword and ran away as fast as I could. So in a way, even though there was a quest where I had to go and grab a sword, and this was the quest that I have set for myself, because again, I can wherever I want. I was guided by the game to not go there yet because I am still under level. Again, open world games as well, they allow you to do different quests and different things. Some games even use quests as guidelines on how to play the game. And they will tell you, oh yes, you must go to the Temple of Shrine or something of the sort. And you go there, and then as soon as you do, they teach you how to dodge roll, for example. And as soon as they do, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Or you might play the game again, and then you know how to dodge roll at this point, so you just completely avoid this because you're allowed to do that. But again, if you are creating an open world game, you can give the players quest agency, and we will get to quests in a bit right after the break. This is Lucky as a baby. He was very cute. Does anybody have questions before we go on a 10-ish minute break? Yes. Okay. Ronald? Jad, إذا بدك type it or raise hand if you want to talk.
Again, sorry again.
عادي.
طيب هلا you just said that you can send players on quests from anywhere in the map. Can't I do that in an open world?
No, I was specifically talking about open worlds.
Yeah, but can't these quests be like linked in a way? Like they can mention, like let's say quest 1 says go get the mustard from the restaurant and I don't know where, and
Yeah.
then when he goes there, they can mention the ketchup that is in another restaurant.
So
It works. ما هيك؟
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
We'll talk
Alright.
about these after the break actually as well.
Yeah. Great.
But yeah, and then basically what I wanted to say about quest agency is give players the chance to do what they want to do in the quest. So you want to tell them, go get the mustard from one place and go get the ketchup from another place, that's fine. But so you have an open world where you have different factions, and one person from one faction gives you a chance to go and talk to this person from another faction, and then you find out that they're lovers, for example. You could potentially give the players you could give the player a chance to snitch on both of them to their respective families, and then the respective families could murder both of them, for example. Or if you did pretty well so far in your run, the families could be united and become a stronger faction because of the Romeo and Juliet-esque situation. So what you wish to do with the quests and what the player wishes to do with the quest depends on the scope of your game and what you can do with it. I think I opened many more doors, many more questions in your head. But yeah, I'll try to go for 10 words. Quest agency is about giving a player the chance to do whatever quests they want, however they want. Okay, hold it. All right. Jad asked if I want to do a narrative game, but it's in a card game kind of setting. So the characters and places are basically cards, but that'd be too complicated. That's actually very interesting. I can kind of see it to a certain extent. I would love to know a bit more about it. I do have a few ideas for what this kind of thing could be. Let's say you could, for example, I think this would technically be very storytelling focused, where, depending on what card you get, it interacts in a specific way with the environment around it. And if the cards that you and your opponents play, or you and your friend play, because, it could just be you two trying to get through a level instead of, beat each other up. If you have correct cards that make sense in the level, then you could potentially write a story or have the players experience a story. So just as an example, let's say the first location card you got was a bakery, and the character card was an orc, and a third character card was a witch. So the witch could potentially brew a potion where you basically start to get item cards for the witch, and then you have fetch cards for the orc. So you could again go for another location card with the orc. And if you get the location that you want, then you're able to fetch the items for the witch. And this would all be done basically via a random cards request or something of the sort. But I would love to hear more about your game. It sounds like an interesting idea. Izza, you'd like to talk about it? Also, you can just unmute at the moment. Izza, I'll bounce to another question. So it's up to you. Okay, cool. Yeah, I understand that it's not fully formed, but if you want to bounce by ideas around, you can do it on the Discord server, or just, you can talk about it in private if you would like. But it sounds interesting. Haya asked, how do you structure a story and choices? I mean, I have some ideas for a story, but I find it hard to structure everything. So a flowchart for major choices, including minor choices. Okay. So this really depends on your own workflow and how you work. So usually one of the things that I do is I just spitball ideas. I write down as many ideas as I can think of in a limited time. And then I put all the ideas I don't want to the side, and then I focus on the ones I do want. Then I set the stories into beginning, middle, and end. So, and then I would start with the end, basically, مش the beginning ولا the middle, because I want to know what I want to tell people, what I want to share with people at the end of the day. So to do that, I just make sure that I know where I'm going to stop. And once I know my end goal, I'm able to write everything backwards. So yeah, this is what I do, for example. I do keep a notebook that I write into, because writing helps expand on ideas as easily as I can, basically. I also have a Google Doc that I use sometimes to help solidify specific concepts. And then once I'm done with these concepts, I pass them by, for example, a designer or something of the sort, and we create the game. One other tip I can give you as well is don't write out a story, especially for games. Write out a, let's say, an action. And then through this action, create the story you want to make. Yani, let's say you want characters, the game you want to make is a drinking game, but I don't mean like alcohol, I mean like water. So you decide that you want to encourage people to stay hydrated. And to do that, you want to make a game where you collect cups. So it could be a 2D platformer where your character jumps around and collects cups, and you need to collect cups before, or like 3 cups per level. Another one could be like a time, depending on time, basically. And then you collect 3 cups before 30 seconds end. Or it could be a puzzle game where you have to move in a specific direction to get to the cup. Or it could be an action game where you have to shoot water, what's it called? You have to shoot water demons to get their water or something of the sort. But all of these ideas overall, the point of what I'm saying is choose a concept that you wish to develop. And after you are done with deciding on the game idea that you want to do, build a story around it. So find the point and expand. All right. Once you feel it's enough, then just stop. And if you're not sure what's enough, go for the minimum that is needed to understand the story while expanding ideas for yourself. Yani, what you guys see at the moment on screen are, there's the presentation and then there's me. And then the things that you can see from me are probably up to my shoulders and then what's behind me. But I can assure you that the rest of me exists and the rest of this room also exists. You have to know the answers to what exists around your game. But this doesn't mean that this is everything that you need to show your player. So to structure a story for a game, you need to have a base of a game. And then once you have the base itself, create the end and move back. All right? I hope this kind of answers your question. Yalla, Ronald, I'll get to you. Wally asked, should you give side quests an actual full-on story for them, or is it okay just to make a small, stupid story for it? You are not Bethesda. You are not PlayStation. You're not Xbox. Enjoy yourself when making side quests. You want to make things that are fun. If you feel like the side quests are going to be boring fetch quests and they're going to be boring cave quests, don't do it. Forget about it. Focus on the main story. That's what matters. Asking because 90% of the times I just skip side quest dialogue, but I do read everything that is related to the main quests and side story. Exactly. What is the point of adding quests if all they're going to do is waste time? You know, yani, we need to increase the output of quality over the output of quantity. فهيك. Okay, cool. Ronald, last question and then we'll break.
Sorry, I have no questions. أنا نسيت what to eat. Sorry.
Okay, طيب, no worries. طيب, we'll be back in 8 minutes. All right, guys. See you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You just missed a Rubik's Cube solve, and that's about it. We also talked about food. Anyway, let's get back to the session. Share screen. All right, bring the chat box here. Let's go. So, all right. I talked about this before, but I'm just gonna say it. We have something called multi-level storytelling. This is kind of like an unofficial name for it, which is the story that you want to tell versus the one that the players want to tell. So you decided that the game that you want to make is going to be an infinite runner, and you're going to call it train trackers, for example. Definitely not an idea that came to my head while thinking of another infinite runner where you run on not trains. Yes, thank you. You guys got it. So basically, most of what you're gonna do is gather feathers and jump on trains and dodge trains, and then you're going to be followed by a hitman for some reason. And so basically, in this kind of game, there isn't too much story to it, which is fine, because you want to get to higher distances or more distances, basically. So once you get to these, let's say you're number world, what happens is people will ask you for advice. They will tell you what's the best way to do this, and you can be like, oh, okay. So when I see two trees and I don't know, two trees and a river, let's say, I decide to slide under the first tree, jump above the second tree, and then land in the river. So this will save me a bit of time, as well as, I don't know, let's say, push me forward with more speed, something of the sort. So basically, the kind of story that was told by this was less about how the game plays out and more about their own experiences. And this is also a kind of storytelling that you can build from the environment. Don't forget the kind of things I said. I've mentioned trees, I've mentioned the hitman, I've mentioned the river, I've mentioned dodging some stuff, I've mentioned the feathers that you need to collect. So these are all things that are set in the environment. And this is where the narrative of the environment comes in. This is where the storytelling of the world that you're building comes in. Again, games like MOBAs and MMORPGs, these are games that are usually, the MMOs are usually like too big. And you do have like, dungeon quests where you go with your friends and you defeat something. But the next day, when, one of your party members didn't show up, you're going to tell them about how cool it was to finally beat this boss. When you're playing a MOBA game, such as League, such as Dota, all these stuff, you're playing these games and you're always, choosing, like, let's say you're playing the same lane as always, and then somebody takes the character that you prefer, so now you have to choose somebody else. So, this in itself was a story for you to tell your friend, especially if you win, because now you have a new character that you like to play, a new character attached to them. TLDR, when you're making a game, not all stories that are being told are stories that you need to write. When you give players a good experience, they will be talking about your game because they will be making their own stories in it. I mentioned chess, I mentioned League of Legends, I mentioned Dota, I mentioned, sometimes when you want to play the Infinite Runner example that I gave as well. So yeah, just whenever you're doing something in a game and you're not focusing on the story but your experience, this is also a part of storytelling, because as soon as you start using words like the rift, or you use things like I don't know, the chalice of chaos, for example, these are all things that could be part of the game, and they become integrated into you as a person, into the stories that you tell, and they all spout from the game that you are playing. So yeah, just because the game doesn't have a narrative doesn't mean that there is no narrative in the game. So yeah. Do we have any questions about this? Zashi saved them till the end. Zashi. All right. So you're building your first game and you decided not to make it an open world game. So this means that it probably has some things that you need to do. These things could be missions or levels, or you decided to make it an open world game and you decided to add quests as well. So let's say, what's the difference between missions, levels, and quests? Does anybody know? If you'd like, as you type, I'm basically just going to talk a bit about each of these. So the way you can go through these really depends on the kind of boundaries that you want to set and what kind of things you want the players to go through. No, they're not the same. So depending on how clear you wish to have the story move forward in set paths is one thing. Quests depend on story. Okay, fair. Quests are optional, come in to a certain extent. Mission complete the mission to progress and understand the story. Level is harder and harder. Quest is something on the side. Quests are longer. We will go through these. So these answers are actually relatively close to what the answer is, but you're close to hitting the mark, but isn't it yet? So basically, a mission is something that is divided into multiple tasks and is part of a linear story. Usually, a mission is something that goes into the main section of a game. A quest is also divided into multiple tasks. However, it is non-linear. So Skyrim would have quests. The single player Call of Duty game would be missions. A level is just a well-defined experience. So, level 1-1 of some specific game, or a specific level in a puzzle. So yeah. And then you've got tasks. So tasks are things that, they are like a tinier part in each of these. So like, let's say the mission, you need to collect 3 items and I don't know, collect 3 items and drive a car to a specific plot of land before you're able to move forward. So these could be like small tasks to completing something specific. Quests, when you want to create them, you can use the 4E rule, which is basically explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, where you walk up to the town, to the village idiot, as they call them, and he tells you, yes, welcome to the town, I hope you enjoy it here. And then you leave basically, and then you start looking around, and then as you do, you, for example, see that there's a river passing through. You see that there are different houses, some of them are open, some of them are closed. You see people tending to their farms, and then you see this guy riding his car down the road. So these are all part of the exploration of what's happening. However, as soon as you saw the guy with the car, you decided to go and follow wherever the car was. So as soon as you did that, you found a power plant or a manufacturing plant. And this is when you started to expand your knowledge on everything that's happening. Exploiting is when you start to understand what you need to do to gain the rewards that you want to get. So if you want to get stronger, you probably need materials to build items. So you know where to go to find these items, like iron ore or whatever you want to call them. And then finally, extermination. It doesn't necessarily need to be, fighting the big bad that you want to fight. It could, to a certain extent, be succeeding in the quest that you want to build or getting to the end of it. Now, if you guys have heard of strategy games, you probably know that they're also called 4X games. And they're called 4X games because of the explore, expand, explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate functions. Yeah, technically that does count as one, correct. So yeah, basically when you want to build a quest, you go up to a dude and then he's like, yeah, so I need you to go get me the mustard from the halfway across the world. So you explore as you go there. And then as soon as you do, you expand your horizons, knowing the path forward and backwards. You exploit the terrain by, climbing up the mountain and then gathering the mustard seeds. And then you, if there are enemies in your way or something, or if let's say the mustard seeds are in the treasure chest in the back, then you have to destroy the main enemy that's in front of you so you can get to it. So yeah, that's just an example of the quests. There are different kinds of quests. Ronald, you did ask about them. You've got kill quests, you've got fetch quests, FedEx quests, collect quests, and escort quests. Kill quests, basically, there are enemies in the cave. I can't go down there. My family heirloom is, with a drug war, and it's going to get eaten by midnight. So please, kind stranger that I've never met before, help me and destroy the evil that be upon us. Fetch quests are basically, hey, you, go get me the thing from that place over there because I'm too lazy to do it myself and I'll pay you. And the thing he gives you is the family heirloom that you took out after you killed all these monsters. A FedEx quest is basically you go around delivering things to different people. So, I'll give you an egg if you get me a chicken and this guy wants a duck in exchange for the chicken, but the duck needs to be caught by having a fish. So to get the fish, you need to go and fish the fish. And then after you fish the fish, you give the fish to the duck, and then you get the duck, you give it to the man who wants the chicken, and they get the chicken to the egg, and the egg to the man. This is a FedEx quest. Yeah. Yeah, most people hate these quests. Collection quests are basically quests where you go and you collect the items that you need to get to. And then escort quests are basically quests where you need to get somebody or an NPC or something from one place to another. This usually involves them dying very, very often as well. So yeah, we do need to find a better way to do escort quests. But this is more or less their types. All right, next we've got levels. So levels are basically just a specific defined barrier of entry and exit into a specific area. Usually levels are set in a way that makes sense to anybody who tries to play them. And the thing is, levels aren't always just exclusively something that looks like Mario or Portal. It's not just about puzzle games or platformers. It could be things like, just like we can see here, this is one of the mobile maps, basically, where you have to go and destroy different towers to get to the base of the enemy. If you think of games, again, like CSGO, for example, or games like Fortnite as well, they do have a level of symmetry where you're able to find specific items in specific areas, and then you slowly converge on one spot. And this is something that you can play again and again to a certain extent. And levels are things that players are going to interact with a lot. So make sure to make good levels. The way to make good levels is to something called white box or gray box or black box. It's basically building the level without everything that you feel you might need. That looks pretty. Yani, I think I have a slide over here about this. Yes. Okay. So this is an example of, just boxing a level. So, one of the examples is, you have the stairs that you can climb up, but, you also have the buildings on the side and the kind of things that you can do. Tahat as well, you have the industrial complex that you can travel and traverse and parkour over and stuff. But as you can see, this is all just, things that exist and they don't look pretty, but you need to be able to play through them in a way that feels nice. And once you're able to play through them and they do feel nice, you know that what you've created is an effective storytelling guide as well. Because, just by looking at the top left picture, you can see that we've got, like bottom areas, and then you have the top, the thing where with the stairs that, gets you to the top. So, for a fact, like when you look at it, that there's something at the top, something important is, there basically. And to get there, you're going to need to climb up the stairs. But who knows? You might find something in the back as well where you can climb up to the top of the smaller square instead of just the big rectangle at the bottom. So, but you won't know if this is fun unless you try it out. Like most Mario games are actually made in, through whiteboxing their levels first. And as soon as they know that Mario feels good to play, then they start building the levels. So again, in the chat, would, them fixing Mario to be comfortable to play and then turning to the levels, would this be a micro or macro world building thing? It would be micro, because again, we're focusing on the player. All right. Next, when you want to create the world of the levels and you wish to create your own kind of levels, take a walk, literally just go and enjoy yourself and see how the world is set. Because most of the time we're just rushing around, we're trying to get things done, and we don't notice how the world is formed around us. Literally just walk around, take a deep breath, look at the buildings, look at the cars, look at the inclines, look at the slopes, look at where there are specific things that help people, look at where there are things that stop people from doing things. Like more recently, for example, I've been noticing a lack of accessibility, for many people who do not have able bodies, for example. Yani, most places in Lebanon aren't equipped to, help people with a broken leg or people in a wheelchair, for example, especially now with the lack of electricity, for example. It's just tougher and tougher to get to places. So if you were in this situation, what kind of things would you feel are challenges? What kind of things are things you would want other people to experience and feel? What kind of things would you like to, shine your light upon and help people explore? These are the kind of things that you have to look into and think about. Create paper mock-ups of everything that you have at hand. You can just write it down. You can just pretend to play a level and say, okay, so this is a square grid, and let's say that my player can jump 2.5 square grids. So if I decide to do that, what kind of thing would I need to build to make the wall jump be viable at a specific point? So let's say, you've got the Rubik's Cube and you've got this cup, and you want the player to jump from the Rubik's Cube position to the cup position. So this means that you would probably need them to be a bit closer so the player can jump, especially since the cup is higher up than the Rubik's Cube. Whereas if you never wanted them to go back, then you could bring them farther and have the player only jump from the cup to the Rubik's Cube, because again, the cup is higher up. And these are things that you don't need to do with actual levels. Just like you saw, I technically gray boxed at the moment by using 2 random items. But, in games, you probably would use like, rectangles, spheres, and squares, cubes and stuff. So yeah. Add randomness. So again, when you're walking on the street, you're probably not going to have it all clean, You're going to see pools of water here and there. You're going to see some of the sidewalk broken. You're going to see one of the, the metal poles on the side of the sidewalk. And one of them is probably going to be bent because, somebody just, hit their car into it or something of the sort. These are kind of these random pieces of life are what bring the world to existence, basically. Learn about everything you can. So I did say geography and architecture, but there is so much more that you can learn about. Learn about things that interest you. If you want to build the world, know what a world is made of and learn that. This will, at the end of the day, be what you care about the most. And especially since it's going to be the game that you're making. But I recommended geography and architecture so you can know where to put mountains, where to put seas, where to put oceans, where to put frost, where to put lava, where to put, why they're formed. Why does your world make sense? These are all things that you need to take into consideration. And this is where, geography and architecture come in. Make sure that you're not building rickety, like a giant building on rickety stilts, for example, because, one kick and it would all fall down. Unless what you want to do is destroy the city, then please be my guest. Yeah. Okay. Again, I mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. Please, 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 please do research. Please. It's very important. The players will notice. The players will love you for it. I did include this Twitter thread, but you can look at it. Like, this is just one of the examples. In one of the zones in Pokemon, they actually used a park in Spain as the inspiration for it. And they were able to garner a lot of hype around it because of that. People were very happy with the thing that was created because, like even with this specifically, they better spruce it up a bit because the park is 1,000 times more beautiful than this. Just go Google it. So, people who have seen what it's like know what they're missing out on. And this is the kind of thing that makes people happy, basically. So create, take inspiration from the world, and people will notice and they will love you for it. So yeah. 1 second. Water is healthy. Drink water, you guys, it's important. Okay. Yeah, I think it is Rafif, by the way. Okay. So stories and the relationship to games. When you want to write a story, remember that not everybody is going to do it. I saw one of the comments was about speedrunners. Exactly. Speedrunners want to finish whatever you've built as fast as they can. And this is what they're going to focus on. This is what they're going to do. And that's fine. That's no problem. So you shouldn't put the story in a very in-your-face position, especially if it's a game with a lot of action. You should put the story in a way where the players that are interested in learning about the story can do that. And those that aren't don't need to. Just give the player the exact information they need when they need it. And then for anybody who wants more, give them a chance to do so. As an example, let's say you went into the Tower of Mages, and then you found somebody with, a sign on their head that, was pointing down on them. So you could go and walk up to them and have multiple chat guidelines. The first one could be like, got any jobs for me? Another one could be, hello, who are you? A third could be goodbye. So if I ask, who are you? He could be like, I am the Archmage of the Tower of Mages, and I am interested, and what can I do for you, my son, for example? And if you ask for jobs, then he could be like, we heard a story of a rogue warlock, and we need somebody to go check it out for us. So just by doing that, you gave the player the ability to choose whether they want to listen to the story or not. And those that don't, that's fine. It's perfectly fine. People are here to have a good time, not to be stuffed in the face with information, And, people who love to write will probably get carried away in writing entire lore, entire sections, entire ideas of their player's favorite toenail. Everything will be written there. And just by doing that, you are going to want to share this with everyone. However, sharing it with everyone is not the correct thing to do. This is why things that I mentioned at the beginning, which are your role as a designer, as a narrative designer, is to build things like environmental narrative and dialogue and journal entries and fluff text and backstories that people can go to and they can read if they want to. Remember, at the end of the day, you're building a game, and this is what people want to go and want to do and see. They want to, play a game. Again, if it's a narrative-based game, if it's like heavy on the narrative, that's fine. You can focus on it, and there's nobody going to stop you. However, if people just want to play, that's fine. That's totally okay, and don't worry about it. So yeah, just like for fun, remember your favorite game, and think about the best thing that happened in it, and think about one time when you were like, "Oh my God, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life." What kind of things did you feel when you played these games? What kind of things did you enjoy? What kind of things did you hate? Were you very focused in the game, and then when the stupid happened, did you suddenly feel like, why am I doing this at this point? Did you feel like you were just pulled out of the experience that you were feeling? Or maybe when you enjoyed the thing that you were feeling, the game that you were playing, did this cause you to just feel like this is the best thing ever? Did you have a kind of moment? What kind of things did you feel? These are things that you want to invoke in players. And you can do that as soon as you yourself are interested and like once you know the feeling that you want to give people, you'll be able to recreate it to a certain extent. All right, so this is more or less the session. You guys have a quick homework to do, and this is something that you're gonna throw away. Okay, so I don't want you to put in too much work in it. I want you to enjoy yourself while doing it. I want you to go to randomwordgenerator.com, get 3 random words, as random as they can be. Don't pick them. You have 2 chances. The first time you click it, and if it's inappropriate, you can click it again, but that's the only thing that you can do. And the level of inappropriateness is up to you. And so you feel like it's something that you consider disrespectful, you don't have to do it. But it's something that you find funny, or it's up to you basically. Get 3 words and then build a world out of them. I don't care what the 3 words are. You're just going to create something out of this. But don't write more than 2 pages. 1 page is more than enough. Use inspiration from real world events, research if you need to, or just use your own personal experience. You might ask your parents something and they might answer something about this. You can use this, choose the world type if you want it to be open or linear or branching. Create 1 mission or level or quest, and don't think of a character yet because we're going to talk about characters. However, you can have somebody that's going to play the role. So yeah. Oh, you guys probably cannot see my screen at the moment. Resume share. Okay. If I do this. All right, cool. So yeah, I'm going to choose 3 words, and then I'm going to generate random words. So queen, average, and withdraw. Just a random game I can come up with in this case is a very average knight came to ask for the queen's hand in marriage. The problem is he had no idea that he needed to go to the princess and not the queen. Queen is a queen because she's married to the king at the end of the day. So he was boxed in to the castle that he was going into, and he has to withdraw as quickly as possible before he gets caught and killed by the guards. So he's going to have to hide in different places. He's going to have to lie and deceive and wear different types of clothes just so that he can get out of the castle. So, this was just a very quick, where's the button? Yeah, so this is more or less the kind of thing that I would do. So 1 last slide. Yeah, thank you guys for attending. I hope you enjoyed. And does anybody have any questions? If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Discord, this is the stuff. And yeah, basically that. Hello, Solo. Do you send your stories on the drawing board? When and where you're gonna submit? Yes. So on the weekend we're gonna send like forms and stuff for you to submit. So you'll just throw them in there basically. You can send your stories to the drawing board so you can see them and give each other feedback, and that would actually be wonderful. But for submissions, it's just better for us to have them in one specific area. That's just it. And they're either going to be in PDF or Word document form. Oh, Notepad or something of the sort. فهيك. Yes, Ed.
Do you hear me?
Oh,
Um, do you know Uncharted 4 or any Uncharted game?
شوي.
Okay. So in the beginning, they say one, something, two, a normal life, three, under the ocean or something, four, playing with his brother, or are these levels or quests or what? What they
So are
call
these
it?
different things that you can do?
Yeah, when you finish one, you pass to the other one. Like, you can
Okay.
choose.
So this would be a linear narrative, and this would be I would say it's mission based أكتر من شيء تاني. لأنه it's different tasks that you need to do that are in a linear fashion.
Oh, yeah. And all of them make the story, like it's not random or something. Yeah.
So
Okay. Thank you.
anytime. أهلا وسهلا. You submit it on. We'll send the links on Discord so that you can just put the thing. Yeah, you'll send it either as a link to the PDF or as the PDF itself. Don't worry about it. Yes, Lucky likes to move around a lot, so he's doing the whoosh whoosh. Cool. All right, Lakin. If nobody has any more questions, let's call it a night. Anytime. أهلا وسهلا. وبنحكي soon. يلا. Take care, you guys. See you. Bye.